speak for this speech, and the first Negating speaker.
We think that when you're faced with the possibility of eternal paradise, with heaven with literal heaven for eternity, versus the incentive of having a chicken, as the outside described to us, we think you're far more likely to want to do more acts when faced with the former prospect. 2 things we'll be doing for you, four things I'll be doing for you in my speech today. First of all, some setup. Some setup, down to some rebuttal, and then onto my 2 substantive points. One, on why we get better incentives for us to do good acts under our side of the house, particularly helping vulnerable people. And then secondly, how we believe that the AFT model, the AFT side, fosters more inequality. But first of all, with the setup. So what do we want out of this debate? What is a way to win this debate? We want people to do good things, especially for the most vulnerable people who we believe can't help themselves, and we're using religion as a vehicle and a mechanism to do this. So what do rewards look like in this lifetime? We hear this characterization, and we'll flag this now, from the outside of the house, that these rewards are going to be relative. We don't believe that's a realistic way in which people could run your religion. We believe your religion always is going to, in a scripture, for example, outline what those rewards in your lifetime are going to be like. And again, we do believe, if you're giving a rich person the example of the incentive of a Ferrari, for example, versus a chicken, those are going to be inherently unequal. So we believe it's far more likely that these religions will want to make sure that these are overarching lifetime rewards that everyone understands. So we believe that these things are also coming from off luck and hard work. They're not actually the results of divine intervention. It's things like winning the lottery or promotions that you get, and we're seen as good, and they're seen as acts of God. What do religions look like? In the afterlife, we believe our afterlife is similar to Christianity, with eternal paradise. It is the best thing you could possibly get. You get everything that you could want, and again, we believe that it's material things in the life. And then how do people access the rewards? We broadly agree that it's just from good acts. Some quick rebuttals. So again, we hear this entire thing about exploitation and about cults and major push on this. We don't believe this is true because we actually believe if you are able to get more legitimacy from being more lucky in your life, from things that aren't the result of divine intervention, things like getting a lot of money, things like winning the lottery, for example, you're actually going to be far more legitimate in the eyes of people and therefore far more open to manipulation. So we actually believe that you're going to be able to get a lot more cults from this side and on that side of the house, because you're going to be a whole lot of key people who are going to be able to abuse people and their belief systems into doing if you follow our do, this is how you're going to get these rewards. We also believe when we get to violence, we believe at worst we believe this is symmetrical really, because we still believe there's going to be the internal pressures within the church, but also you do have to make a big sacrifice in order to get these internal rewards, to get better internal rewards. So we still believe this is symmetrical. And I'll integrate rebuttal into why we believe disillusionment, why we believe we actually get better deeds. So onto the incentives. So context of this is that we believe people are inherently selfish and they want to do things out of their own self-interest for the betterment of themselves in the future. We proved at this point that people are going to act and do better things for in our respective incentives. How do we prove this? First of all, as I told you at the start, the idea of a paradise is literally the best thing you can ever get. An afterlife is really good. It is heaven. As we see it, you can get every single thing that you want. People like that idea far more because you have more to gain. You have literally the best thing on earth, everything you possibly desire in heaven, your family, everything you want. We believe there's a lot more to gain out of that, and we'll get out to the comparative a bit later. So we believe people are going to want to do more, in following your beliefs and trying to achieve that thing far more than you are going to want to do under the outside of the house. A bigger incentive is going to lead to bigger acts. The outcomes of this is you're going to get more people doing bigger and better things. Things like donating a lot of their wealth, people like volunteering their time to help poor people, doing like individual kind acts, just like buying a person a burger outside of McDonald's when they really need it. Second way we prove this is, again, we believe the act incentives are just far less valuable. If you've got rewards in this lifetime, we just don't believe they stack up the same. If you want a sports car, if you want a mansion, if you want like a family, at best, if these are the things that you're able to actually get, we believe that you can get that and some more in heaven itself. So we just believe that like independently, you just don't get the same. You don't get the same incentives under their side of the house. So on our side of the house, under their side of the house, people are doing far less, and they're doing far smaller things because you have that like less incentive to do it. So you're gonna like be donating less money. You're gonna all like not at all donating money, and we really like just not making sure of these things as well. So we believe, and thirdly, we believe that devotion is eventually going to be lost under their side of the house. Why? Because again, we don't believe these rewards are actually the result of divine intervention. It's things like hard work, it's things like luck, right? And we believe that the majority of people who aren't lucky, who are very unfortunate in life, we also believe like things like the poverty cycle immediately remain, which you can't overcome, you can't get out of, you can't be just fortunate to get out of the poverty cycle. We also believe things like discrimination, sexism, racism, homophobia, things in this workplace that will obstruct you in real life from actually getting the benefits, getting like the real-time rewards that they're describing under their side of the life. So really, like, at the end of the life, even if you've done a bunch of good things, and these goods haven't arrived, you're just going to start questioning it. You're going to tell your kids it didn't work for me, don't do it. We believe the outcomes of this is ultimately you're going to lose your faith, and also like you're telling your kids not to do it. So in their lifetimes, they're going to not be doing these good acts at all. So we believe that ultimately, we get to this point where people under their side of the house aren't doing these good things, and aren't getting these acts. And we also believe, like, there's another point here, that like people are losing that community and losing that belief that could be one of them. So why is this most important in this debate? Because we believe that ultimately, all these good acts that we're getting people to do under our side of the house are essential, and they're helping everyone else, particularly again the most vulnerable people. And we'll get into more why when we get to my second point of how they actually detriment poor people as well. So on to that point now, we get how this is going to foster inequality. We believe that people again are like believe that people get what's coming to them in this world in religion, right? So we prove this by first of all showing that again, rich people are going to act less under their side of the house. Why is this? Rich people believe you get rewarded for doing good things, right? Well, not just rich people, everyone believes you get rewarded for this. Therefore, poor people are people that deserve to be there, or don't deserve to have lucky things. They don't deserve to have good things, because they've done bad things in the past, or they're not doing enough. So therefore, there's no incentive for a rich person to donate, or to volunteer, or to vote in the favor of a party, to do good things, to reallocate resources for these people. You can just help other people. You can sponsor a friend to go on a marathon, where you still believe you can get those bucks, and you're actually just not helping what you believe to be sinners on their side of the house. And the comparative of us, we don't know where you stack up. You can't judge a person immediately based off their social standing. You still help to ensure people get the greatest benefit. So you are going to do things like donation under our side of the house, in our house. So secondly, we believe that ultimately, rich people already believe that they are lucky, right? If you believe you do good and you believe you're getting rewarded for that, you are rich, you could have a lot of wealth inherited, or you could have just gained it unfairly through exploitation or something. That is an example of one of those rewards that we're talking about, right? So when you believe, as a rich person, you believe you've done well enough in life, you've done good enough acts in life to gain this thing, to gain this luck, to gain these rewards. Therefore, you have no incentive to change your ways, to act differently, to do more things for poorer people, to do more things for more vulnerable people. And so we don't believe people are going to actually change their ways in this regard. And so we don't believe that currently what they're doing is enough. So again, we don't believe they're going to be donating as much. Ultimately, how do we look at this one? We look at outcomes. People are using this to justify things like racism. You have what's coming to you, and things like that. And we ultimately believe out of this, when we weigh this point highly in this debate, because we believe creating this internal caste system in which people at the top are always going to be staying at the top, and people at the bottom always stay at the bottom. We believe it actually actively makes things worse under their side of the house, overruling any benefits you could get from having this, any downside you could get from culture under our side of the house. That is why I'm proud to negate.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the second speaker from the Affirmative.
Beginning my speech in 3. When you are faced with the outcome in a state of absolute vulnerability and submission of leaving an abusive, permissive cult structure rather than actually providing enduring recovery for the abuse that you are facing, purely because you believe you have this constraint, purely because you are so fearful that there's going to be eternal damnation if you do not follow the changeable demands of the cult leader, we believe that we provide this narrow yet immensely vulnerable proof
and invite up the second negating speaker.
Cults. We've heard a lot about cults, but what we haven't heard is what a cult is, where a cult comes from, and what keeps people in a cult. We do not believe it is what the affirmative team would like you to think. Three main things to do for you in today's debate. First, to talk about this big push of cults. Second of all, to address their idea of how the rich interact with the poor. And third of all, to think about religious texts and interpretation. Alright, first of all, let's look at these ideas of cults. First of all, starting off, why do people join cults? People often join cults because they feel disillusioned. They feel they're without purpose. They feel their previous religion has let them down, and they need to recapture that purpose, recapture that feeling, so they turn to a more fringe organization. Therefore, as we've told you, because more people become disillusioned when they don't receive the gifts of the afterlife, because only like 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 people are actually going to get lucky and receive gifts. Why? Because that's the nature of luck. If everyone's getting it, you don't feel like it's a special reward, right? Okay, so only a very limited number of people are actually feeling like they're receiving this award. They are becoming more disillusioned, and so they are turning towards more cults. Why else do we have more cults? We introduced to you this idea of first of the legitimacy that is brought to lucky people on their side of the house. On their side of the house, when someone is successful, when someone can say, I have a Lamborghini, or I have a really good life because I'm really in tune with nature and my friends. They have something tangible and real that they can dangle in front of someone as a reason they have been inspired by God. What do we see on our side of the house? We see on our side of the house that because you're looking at more of an idea of like heaven and hell being separate from earth, you really need to see like a divine type miracle to believe someone is a prophet, to believe someone is bringing a lot to the table, is like inspired by God. Whereas on their side of the house, you simply need to see that they're successful, that they've got these tangible rewards, and then you say, actually, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's successful, so he knows the path to success. I will follow him, I will follow his cult. So that is how they get more cults on their side of the house. Also, this idea that there is always going to be this manipulation. Cults, a lot of the time, are based around charismatic leaders or cults of personality. That is always going to be the case. Also, when they tell you about like the violence that you're seeing, this is always because of a different underlying issue, a pressure from within that group, a personal leader with an agenda. That can always happen. People are just looking for an excuse. When they don't find an excuse like the afterlife, we see examples like kamikaze attacks where people justify it with ideas of glory or ideas of honor. There's always an excuse that these people who are receiving pressure, who are being brainwashed like they are in cults, can find to commit these crimes and to take these acts. That is not the only thing that you are getting. It is not exclusive to a world with an afterlife. Okay, so now that we've dealt with this idea of cults, their main push, by the way, let's have a look at what else we have going on. So they've told you that rich people aren't, so we brought to you this idea that when you believe that luck is inevitably a result of non-sinning, of not being a sinner, not yet, those lucky people are the people who have done well. And those unlucky people are the sinners. Now they told us religion is not about discrimination. I would say in all religions there is one major piece of discrimination. There are the sinners and there are the non-sinners. That is something consistent in all religions. There are the people who have gone against what they are supposed to do because the religion has rules, and if you have rules, you have rule breakers. Right. So when you believe that these people who are unlucky in their lives, who are not getting chickens, or who maybe are not getting enough family fulfillment, they've told a lot about how it's like a fundamentally capitalist model, but you can also objectively measure other things like, oh, you're going to get a really good family life if you follow this religion. Okay, so people who disagree with their families because they're abusive or something like that are going to think that they're not doing enough. There are millions of examples for all kinds of real things, because when something is real and tangible and in the real world, it is measurable and it is comparative, and people can start thinking about how that works, okay? So we see that whether it's poor people or whether it's people who are autistic and so don't make many friends and so don't feel like they're getting the reward of a good social life, they are feeling inadequate and people who are getting those things are thinking they're not just awkward, they're not just socially unlucky, they're actually bad, they're a sinner. So we're going to exclude them. So we don't care about them because in religions really you don't necessarily interact with the sinners. You can be nice to the non-sinners, to the people that are more deserving, obviously, because they're doing well in life, and so they must be good, kind people that deserve. I'm gonna take one eventually, okay? That deserve friendship. So this idea that they push that it's somehow like overly capitalistic just doesn't apply. And so we see that the rich people, or the people rich in some other objective measurement of quantity, are going to look down on others, are going to say, they're sinners, so I don't care about them. I shouldn't help them, I should just be nice to the people I know who are my level of social strata, or who are good at the things I'm good at. This has incredibly tangible harms when we look at things like donations, when we look at things like excluding people, when we look at telling one group that they are good and that other people are bad. The fundamental difference on our side of the house is when you have an afterlife, the only tangible way to tell that a judgment has been made is after someone's death. We are all not yet judged. On this side of the house, you see the physical evidence of that judgment in fundamentally arbitrary things, like luck, like social ability, like all of those things. So we can see that at the end of this point, this whole idea that the rich are somehow not going to be looking down on the poor is incorrect. I will take your point.
Don't you think that in your world you're still judged on whether you belong to the religion or not?
Yes, but I think that's non-exclusive. I think being judged on whether or not you belong to a religion is something that happens by nature of being a religion, has nothing to do with being in the afterlife or not. We're looking at the people inside the religion, the people who are affected by this debate, and that is what I would like both teams to focus on. Alright, finally we get this push around like the idea of religious texts and how like nothing's clear in them and they can be interpreted differently. Not only do we see this as like something that's non-exclusive, you can have a religious text that says you will have prosperity and a guy can say, okay, that means Lamborghini, right? Prosperity is the word they use. Like other types of things like that. But also we see that with this idea of people who have more legitimacy because they are lucky and so able to interpret better than everyone else, you will have more interpretations that are warring against each other, not only creating more conflict, but also creating like more ability to manipulate these interpretations. This is simply a point that is stronger on our side of the house. Then they tell us that like, oh, heaven's like too intangible for people to care about it, but that directly, one, contradicts their own material about how cults are going to be able to use heaven, and two, we think fundamentally, if people are able to imagine a thing that they don't have, be it Lamborghini or really nice garden forever, it is just like the same ability to imagine, right? Especially when there are usually texts or people telling them how to interpret these things, but even if they see it as a slightly less likelihood or slightly buy into it less, it is such a big incentive that we are far, far more likely to have people, one, staying in our religion longer, because they're not disillusioned, because they don't see that the rewards they were promised never came to pass, so they stay in the religion longer, and they do more good deeds. That is what we care about. Look, almost every religion in the world is positive, is good, as they told you, so these like fringe examples, even if they were to win them, do not weigh highly in this debate. What weighs highly in this debate is the incredibly large incentive of people to do good deeds, because that is when we get individual kindness, that is when we get votes for change, that is when we get care for the poor and vulnerable, that is where we win this debate.
two ways in which we win this debate. Firstly, if we can prove that on their side of the house, they foster inequality and a lack of empathy towards the vulnerable communities of our world. And secondly, if we can prove that we provide people with more incentive to be good people or just to do good in general. Okay, a few things to get through in this debate. Firstly, some clarification on, for example, why do cults come about, why do people stay, and also what do the religions look like on either side of the world, because I think that's like a bit messy at the moment. And then I want to get into our points of clash. Firstly, on who actually gets more good deeds, and secondly, 3 points of clash. Secondly, who gets more religious extremism / more buy-in to religious extremism, and lastly, but potentially most importantly, who actually has more empathy towards the vulnerable on either side of the house. Okay, so firstly, on some clarification of the setup, what do each of our sides' religions look like? We think that it's kind of been lost here that these religions exist in reality. We don't have to be talking up in the air. We have things like Catholicism that believe in a heaven, that believe in eternal reward, and tell you, no thank you, that when people do good, for example, they will reap these rewards in an afterlife. On their side of the house, they have things like karmic religions, like for example Hinduism, where we see that people gain these rewards within their life via karma. So when they do good, they expect good to come towards them. We think that has been lost a bit, but this is the reality of things. Nextly, I want to talk about the origins of cults and why people stay, but I think I'll actually do that obviously before I talk about cults. Okay, so moving on to faith and devotion. And this basically is who gets more good deeds. Okay, so we hear on their side of the house this real push of tangibility, gold bars, why people do good in general. And they tell us that on their side of the house, it is because they see tangible rewards for their actions. Well, firstly, we simply cannot buy this because we think that regardless of how good you are in your life, many things are simply based off of luck, chance, and honestly, just hard work, right? So we think that on their side of the house, what they have is a bunch of people who believe that when they hold a door open for someone else will hold a door open for them. We think that this just simply isn't the reality. If I happen to be nice to Lucy, it doesn't mean that she's going to be nice to me. And so what does this mean? It means that we can only on their side of the house reach a point of disillusionment. What does that look like? This looks like people who are raised religious, who are raised to believe in these cycles of if I do good, good will happen to me. When good doesn't happen to them, then they lose their purpose, they have nowhere to go in life, and they simply give up. This means that when they see themselves lost in cycles, for example, of depression, for example, of poverty, they have much less incentive on the affirming side of the house to get themselves up out of this cycle. How is this different on our side of the house? Firstly, by keeping religion and material success separated, we have more emphasis on the practical ways in which people are able to bring themselves out of poverty, out of depression, those sorts of things. We think that and based on what we've told you from James, we have more philanthropy in general, therefore we have more support for these vulnerable communities. I'll get into this later. Okay, what I have written here is that they tell us a gold bar. Oh yeah, they give this gold bar example as an incentive. We think that it's absolutely more incentive when you tell people that they have a paradise, a beautiful garden, mansions waiting for them in heaven. Regardless of its tangibility, we think the sound of that is pretty nice. And we think that they lose the fact that on their side of the house, their rewards are not immediately tangible either. So when you present someone with, hey, you're going to be really successful in the future, versus, hey, when you die, you're going to have mansions and gardens and eternal wealth, we think that our incentives are necessarily nicer looking. So even if you think that people believe in immediate value and tangibility, we think that if you buy what I say about being disillusioned, that this is a thing that must happen. So even if they buy this tangibility in the first place, it leads to disillusionment. And this means that their rewards graph doesn't work that they showed us because the cycle doesn't exist where you do good and have good happen to you. It's simply unfeasible. We think that even if you buy the tangibility then, what are you going to see on their side of the house? You're going to see a bunch of people who are considered wealthy. And if we're buying what they say about how this doesn't necessarily have to be capitalist, this applies in many senses, right? This looks like people with happy family, like nuclear family lives, people who have a lot of friends or are just well off to do socially, and this means that they're more likely to see themselves as like divinely rewarded and therefore don't have to do good towards others because they've already done enough good to like gain these rewards in their life. This is, I think, where they lose the debate because they are unable to like counter us when we tell them that we provide people with more incentive towards our vulnerable communities. We give people more reasons because we're like dangling a fruit in front of them and telling them that they're going to have heaven in eternity. We think that that's much more incentive for people to like be kind to the vulnerable, even if they're never going to see these tangible rewards, even if the afterlife doesn't actually exist. This still does in reality. We still have all of these outcomes, and that is why you should weigh this so much more highly, because we have so much more support. Now, onto this idea of like who gets more cult and religious extremism. Firstly, why do cults come about? We think it's because of this disillusionment. We think that when people become disillusioned with their religions, they necessarily become angry. That is what forms a cult, because they want to like, and that is what incites violence, because they like have these feelings of anger and disillusionment with their religion, which kind of leads them to like build their own religions, to gain their own followings, to show that they can do it better. So even if you believe like all of what they've told us about people's abilities to leave cults because they see that they're not getting these tangible rewards, we think that this doesn't really help them when they simply have more cults that more people are likely to join on their side of the house. However, we think that this is actually not why people stay in cults. It is not for tangible reward. Even if that is the reason that they initially join a cult, we think that it is, as Michael said, because of these cults of personalities, because of these cycles of manipulation that force people to stay. We don't think that having no tangible benefits on their side of the house is actually going to change whether they stay in a cult. When they tell us that cults target vulnerable people, we think that these vulnerable people on their side of the house are the people who have become disillusioned with religion, especially one that they were born and raised with. When they tell us about the violence that could potentially happen, we think that this is symmetrical at worst. Even if the people on their side of the house aren't giving up their lives, they're definitely, especially if we aren't going with this capitalist reward, if they believe that they're going to get like more personal fulfillment, they're probably willing to give all their money away to an evil cult leader because they've been told that they're going to have like a better family life because of it. Therefore, we think the harms on their side of the house are so much worse. So what should you believe at the end of this debate? Firstly, we give people so much more incentive to do good, regardless of like the luck that they have, in their lives. Secondly, we've proven that their side of the house fosters inequality, fosters a lack of empathy, gives people much less incentive to be kind to other people, and as Michael pushed, that they're like just going to treat other people worse or see them as like deserving what they have. And thirdly, we've proven why we definitely don't get cults on our side of the house, and even if we do, their problem is just as big as ours, and that is why we win this debate.
I'd like to skip for the speech, and as a customary, who are speaking or in the part of the reply speaker.
We think there are a variety of ways, two primary ways in which we can win this debate. One in which we prove to you that under our side of the house, people will act more and do better things for the most vulnerable people in particular under our side of the house than we will under side F. And secondly, how we have more people generally doing more good things. And we also believe we can build a margin of victory when we prove to you that under their side of the house, they're also harming vulnerable people through cults. So, 3 points of class in which we prove this. What are the impacts on the vulnerable? What are the impacts on acts and incentives for people to do good? And then finally, what are these impacts on cults? On to this first point about what are the impacts on the vulnerable. We believe this is the most important of this debate because it's for the people that cannot help themselves. We believe other people may be able to uplift themselves in other situations, but we believe that this is the most broad, but also the people who cannot help themselves. That's why it's important we use religion as a vehicle in order to do this. This is one way in which we win. So we give you a big push from us at throughout our line at Neg, in which we believe that the rich or the most fortunate people will not help the most vulnerable people because they do not believe, because they perceive them to have sinned in the past. We give you the idea that firstly, it is poor people that will be the sufferers of this. We believe that, as Lydia told you, keeping them separate is actually a really good idea under our side of the house in order to separate this poor and rich dynamic and religion. And we also believe we're just generally going to get more philanthropy. We win here, but let's take them at their best, at the push that they give us, in which we're actually not talking about poor people. We're talking about like the social lives, we're talking about families as well. We just believe that these like things carry over. If you're an orphan, for example, if you're from an abusive family, for example, if you're autistic and you cannot like talk with other people as much and you're socially isolated, we believe that these harms like still exist, right, for these vulnerable people. We believe it's things like not opening up an orphanage. It's not like being there in a foster home to help other people, right? We believe that these harms still exist on vulnerable people, regardless of which lens you view it through. So therefore, we're like under this side of the house, we believe there's an active like worse off for the most vulnerable people under their side of the house. That is one of the ways in which we win this debate compared to our side of the house. And we actually prove in the next point how we actually get more people helping them. So this next point, what are the impacts of how we get more people to act better? So we get this big push. We give you this idea that like we get more of an incentive. We get a pushback that this actually isn't tangible, like heaven isn't tangible for some reason. We don't believe this is true. First of all, we use like the gold bar analogy for this. But like, first of all, we believe that like, we still believe that like at the very worst, they're still like almost symmetrical and that they're both in the future. They're both things that you will be getting. You still act under that assumption when you're making those decisions that it will be in the future. Additionally, as we told you down the line, there's a disillusionment which actually makes it worse when you don't get those real rewards because you're expecting them to come in your lifetime. You actually will not be doing those acts in the future. We told you this down the line. And then also we just generally believe there's like a belief system in religion. But like, forget about that. So even if like we believe that equally intangible, if not more. And then finally, like onto this, we just believe heaven is better. We told you this. We get limited response from this, and like at our best, we believe that like on our side, people are doing more. Even if you believe it's intangible, we still believe like that carrot stick in front of you is going to make people act. So we believe that more people are doing more. That's going to like encourage people to help the vulnerable in this scenario, even like help people get out of cults. And onto this point about cults very quickly, we get this big push about how like people who believe in the afterlife are going to stay in cults more, like people under their side of the house are actually going to like have this revelation that they're going to be able to leave these cults. So first of all, we believe that like as we told you at Michael and at Lydia, cults are actually more prevalent under their side of the house because of this disillusionment factor, which we've mechanized throughout our case as well. We believe it's like their anger, more people that aren't getting these rewards because we do not believe it's because of things like if you're discriminated against, if it's sexism, racism, homophobia, these things, these people, vulnerable people we also believe, like going into these cults, creating these cults, and that's a way in which we actually get more cults under their side of the house, more vulnerable people are harmed. That's one of the ways in which we win, but we also believe we should value those other things higher, but this is how we build a margin of victory, and that is why I'm proud to negate.